Hello, Megan. Welcome to the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks so much for having me.
I am excited about this because first of all, you're my cousin, my first cousin, and you're like a sister
Yes,
to me. And so I know, sister power. So I think you've got a lot of wisdom to share, and I'm excited that you are coming on the show and just paying it forward, frankly, because hopefully this will make someone's journey a little bit easier. I do like to always kick things off with a positive note. So we pull something from the words of encouragement from the Happy Healthy Caregiver jar. This was something I created for Sister Susie. And if people want to create their own jar, their box, their whatever container, I do have the inserts and a refill pack now available online, very affordable for people to purchase. So we'll link to that in the show notes. But your quote today says, it says, give yourself time. Nothing in nature grows all year round.
That's great advice.
Yes, I think to me that says like, hey, even God and Mother Nature, they got to take breaks.
Yes.
and they got to like start working on the next thing. And so it's a reminder, I think, for us to kind of just pull back. And also, I think it makes me think of the seasons of life, and that caregiving is just a season. It's not our entire life.
Exactly. That was advice you gave me early on, and it really helped me through my journey too, is that, it's not permanent. When you're in it, it can feel that way, but it's not.
It's not, I know. And I think sometimes we feel guilty for wanting that season to end because we don't want the person to disappear from our lives, but we do want the suffering, I think, to disappear from our lives. So I know I have the privilege of knowing all about you, but for the folks that are listening, do you mind just sharing a synopsis of your caregiving journey and where you are now?
Sure. So my name is Megan. I'm a 30-something living outside of Greater Washington, D.C. And my caregiver journey started about 5 years ago. My parents and I have always been very close. I'm an only child. And my mom in particular, kindergarten and first grade teacher, life of the party, had the perfect holiday outfit for every occasion, very vivacious, had a sparkle. And we just started to notice some changes in her behavior, in her personality, and we really couldn't explain them. And long story short, after a long journey of misdiagnosis and lack of access to care, quite frankly, in our rural hometown, made the discovery that my mom was living with a rare form of frontotemporal dementia known as progressive supranuclear palsy. And so people hear dementia, and oftentimes they think of what I refer to as the more traditional types of dementia that are memory, particularly long-term memory. And that really wasn't my mom's journey. It was more the frontal lobe of your brain controls your executive reasoning and your cognitive function and your personality. And so those were the changes that we saw first. And then specifically with PSP, it does have a significant impact on your motor function. So your ability to keep your balance, walk, talk, facial expressions, and things of that nature. And so I, along with my dad, was primary caregiver for my mom. I was doing them from a distance and a lot of the care coordination, and my dad was really in it day to day. And then my mom unfortunately did wind up passing away from this illness this past June. So definitely still fresh, and I'm also kind of in a position of now dealing with the fallout from a lot of the caregiver burnout that my dad experienced in his own process and chronic conditions such as diabetes. So it's definitely seasons, and they grow and they change, but I feel like the caregiver journey started early for me as a relatively young adult, and is now continuing on.
That was you summed that up great. And I know for me, when I didn't get to see Aunt Chris and your dad Terry, Uncle Terry as often, because I live in Georgia, they live in Pennsylvania, and the first time that we had noticed something was at Natalie's graduation party, where I just, like you said, your mom was, you know, always so put together and vivacious, and hey, Kizzy, she used to, you know, call me, and love you. And it just was like, almost like a light had diminished in her. And so that was kind of our first reckoning. And I know at that time you were trying to figure it out, you and your dad, and you mentioned briefly the rural complexity to everything, but that I think was very apparent for me in your situation. Like Du Bois, Pennsylvania, it's close to the hometown where I grew up in Brockway, and there's just not a lot of resources there. And so maybe just explain a little bit, like what ended up working for you, what you know, what worked in the end.
Yeah, I think a big piece of it for me is persistence. My mom and I are stubborn, and it's a blessing and a curse. But I think when you're caregiving, nobody knows your loved one better than you. So a lot of times, and especially in the early part of this journey, my mom was misdiagnosed with a mental health condition. And I could sidebar about that for a long time too. The brain's an organ, it's part of health, it should be treated equally. But I think especially in that generation of our parents' generation, there's still a lot of stigma around it and a lack of understanding. And so I think I saw particularly in my mom and a little bit in my dad, this desire to kind of like sweep it under the rug and pretend like nothing was wrong at first. But then to your point, it became apparent. You started to notice not only the mental changes, but also the physical changes in my mom. It looks like the lights went out is a comment I heard a lot from friends, family. So just advocating and not taking no for an answer when we would go to doctors and they would just kind of make a snap reaction. And I'd say, no, like I would try to educate them on my mom and who she was and her medical history, and ask questions and encourage them really to keep looking. And it was actually a friend of mine who had a family member with frontotemporal dementia who sent me a link to a research study and said, have you looked into this? And I remember reading it and just crying, because every symptom was what I was experiencing and not apparently able to effectively articulate to a doctor. And so that really led me then to start talking to her doctors and push for more testing and more a deeper dive. And I think one of the things that was so interesting about that is once we could get the primary care physician on board, and she was really an advocate for us. And I admire her because she would be the first to admit, like, it seems like your mom has a rare condition and there's not a lot of resources and we're kind of stumped. And she referred her out to a neurologist. And it was October. And the neurologist got back to us and said, our first available appointment is at the end of March the following year. What? And that to me was just like so unacceptable, like to wait 6 months when you know that there's a problem. But that was the reality. And when I pushed back on that, the coordinator for the neurology department in our hometown said, yes, that is our first available appointment. There's only 2 neurologists in this area. And so I was able to use my professional network, because I work in healthcare marketing, and was kind of venting about the macro issue of lack of access to care in rural communities. And a colleague of mine was able to connect me to a neurologist at UPMC in Pittsburgh. And so we made the trek. It's a little under 2 hours from our rural hometown to there. It had incredible quality of care, but for people who don't have a professional network, or maybe even the financial means or the time, my dad was retired, so he was able to commute with her. It's really a barrier to effective care. And particularly when it's a rare and debilitating illness, like what my mom had, that really has a significant impact on the trajectory of the illness for the loved one, but also on the lives of the caregivers.
Yeah, you brought up so many good things in there, Megan. Like, first of all, I love that the persistency. We're related through my dad. Had one and only sister, my Aunt Chris, and Megan is my only first cousin on the Behe side, and so we did get some persistency genes from them, and a lot of fun things too. I also think that you're the expert in your mom, and so the the journey you have for your advocacy and your persistency, I think is super admirable. And it got your mom fast tracked together. Now, like looking back at, thank goodness you got that diagnosis and didn't have to wait for those appointments, so that you could, just take a breath and know what it is and know that you're getting treatment and that you're on the right track. And so your mom, she was persistent for my dad's health. And so I know that she was smiling on the inside. I also think this was our first family experience. We've had a lot of caregiving experience in our family, but the first one with a cognitive issue. And it's just been, a learning experience for all of us. And I think we'll be, unfortunately, now we know, a little bit, and we can help other people. Being that you were a few hours away, Meghan, and you work full time, you're young, you've got your own life that you're living, did you have to set boundaries with your parents?
I was not particularly good at that. I will be the first to admit. And probably my mental and physical health suffered for it a little bit, if I'm honest. I obviously wasn't in the day to day, so I think my dad did shoulder a lot of that burden, but I think also because of the burnout, I really had to step in a lot. So it was a lot of frequent travel back and forth. It's about 4 hours to Du Bois from where I live, and it was a lot of road trips back and forth and a lot of phone calls, long phone calls. And then I did find it finally reached a point where it was just too overwhelming. So I really went into triage mode of one thing I could do really well from a distance was care coordination. So I kind of lasered in on that, and I handled the medical appointments, the appointment reminders, coordinating with the various doctors and ultimately specialists that she would see. And that was really out of necessity, because what I would find is, my mom was having a cognitive illness, so she couldn't be relied upon to capture the notes and the specifics from the doctor's appointments. And my dad has a little bit of hearing trouble. He has hearing aids now and is doing great. And he was overwhelmed. So a lot of times they would go to an appointment and I would call that night and ask for some details, and they wouldn't be able to provide them. And so I really kind of had to insert myself and establish that relationship with their care providers to just kind of make sure that we were keeping the trains on the track, we were asking the right questions, and hopefully trying to get the best outcome. We knew pretty early on that this was a terminal illness. So, there's no cure and there's really not very many effective treatments, but how can we, make the best of the time she has, was a question that I often found myself asking.
You're a superstar project manager. The triage thing, I think, is where you shine, but I mean, it's a very emotional thing as well. What did you finally have to do? I mean, being that you were 4 hours away, how did you get your mom and dad to finally realize and accept that they needed more help?
Yeah, that's a big thing, is they were very resistant to help from me. It's kind of like what Dave Ramsey calls the powdered butt syndrome, where if you raised a baby and changed their diapers, you're really not interested in their health advice. So I definitely had a little bit of that. And I think it was the sister power. It was really you and Susie in particular kind of stepping in and helping me have those courageous conversations with my parents of, this isn't sustainable. Also getting the medical community involved. They had home health set up after my dad had, frankly, a health crisis of his own, where he passed out when he was walking the dog on a very cold day in January, and a neighbor, thankfully, discovered him and was able to get him some help. But that was really the crisis point, which led to home health. And then having the home health social worker help me initiate that conversation of, hey, this really might not be a sustainable, safe place for your mom and your dad. And we want to make sure that they're safe and healthy and happy. And have you considered something like an assisted living or some more in-home support? And really the in-home support would have been preferred for our family. But again, the rural community, there's such a shortage of in-home caregivers that it really wasn't an option for us, because my mom eventually ended up needing round-the-clock care.
Yeah. I will say though, like being in that rural facility that she was in, that's also a benefit. I think that, you know, it's a small town. People knew her as a teacher. People, you know, your dad as, you know, worked in the school community to like, and so I think that up her level of care. And I know Terry's mom is also in the facility. And so it's a small world, which is kind of a benefit when you get into that situation. I know you mentioned like you had to get the social worker to help. And I remember a call where your instinct when you went there to meet with the social worker that was going to assess the situation, it was to kind of fix what you saw and clean it up. And I was like, Megan, no, you've got to let them see exactly how it is, because this is the only way that you're going to get the help that you need. And it just was a kind of pitiful, frankly.
Yeah, I really found them in quite a state of disarray. And
Yeah,
it's hard because you love them and you don't want them to be, you know, unclean or in pain, and so you're trying to kind of do what you would normally do as a caregiver. But if you're always jumping in and fixing it, I can't be there all the time. I was 4 hours away. So I discovered it that morning, but what about the other mornings, that week, that month, that year? And
exactly.
it was hard, but to your point, eye-opening. And you really do have to be willing to show the messy parts to your support team, your community, to your medical providers. Like, you can't sugarcoat this stuff.
No, be vulnerable, ugly cry if you need to, whatever it is, like, you know, to just to kind of show what it's really like. I know growing up, we always wanted your dad on our trivia team because he's probably literally a genius. Like, I don't know what his IQ is, but super smart. And I remember when things were getting kind of crazy, like we were shocked that you had found out he was a victim of elder fraud. And I don't know if you just mentioned, like, our minds were just blown that of all the people in the world, this happened to your dad.
Yeah. My dad, super intelligent man, super thoughtful. We had even talked probably in the year prior about like how, you know, we would make fun of those phone calls you'd get that were like, this is the IRS and you are in trouble for fraud. And then my dad fell for one of those things. And I think it was really just a hard wake-up call for me of how far he had slipped emotionally, mentally, physically. And I think in a weird, twisted way, why he didn't flag it for me sooner is he knew I was shouldering so much, because that was towards the end when mom was on hospice care. And we knew that she was probably in her last month of life. And I guess in a weird way, he thought like, well, I'll take care of this mess so that Megan won't have to. And in the end, created a larger mess. Because we had to, I mean, he really gave them like all of his personal information, his social security number. They even convinced him that he needed to go buy Visa gift cards so that they could open like a second account for him while the investigation was ongoing. And to your point, that's not my dad. He's too intelligent for something like that. And it just goes to show how much people prey on seniors, but also like how vulnerable someone who is, like how vulnerable someone can become in a crisis situation. And so it was just, it was one other thing. And luckily there too, a family friend happened to be visiting the evening I discovered this. And so she jumped in and said, like, you need to go back and be with your mom. Here's your dinner wrapped up to go. And I'm going to take your dad to the police station and the bank and go through that process with him. But yeah, it was a lot.
It was a lot, and it's still like unbelievable to me, which is just a reminder to all of us listening to have those conversations with our family members, our, you know, older adults, because again, there's some sick people out there, and it's just a sad thing that they prey on them. You went through kind of, you know, a lot of crazy during the pandemic. I mean, how did the pandemic affect your caregiving experience?
Yeah, I think about that often. I think I knew that my mom needed like an assisted living type situation for probably 6 months to a year before we placed her. And a large, perhaps the most significant reason that we hesitated was because of COVID and the restrictions, because so little brought my mom comfort or peace as her mind continued to deteriorate. And one thing that was physical presence from myself and my dad. And so knowing that if we had moved her sooner and not been able to visit her or have any type of physical contact, a hand on the back, on the shoulder, a hug, was just going to be more detrimental. But I think about that a lot, that like, if it had been a normal time in our nation, would I have been able to get her placed sooner? And would she have thrived from that structure and that routine? And I think too, even being in the home, a lot of the number one thing they tell you for PSP and FTD is have routines, predictable, reliable routines. And my mom did that small town life. She had this group of girlfriends that went out to lunch once a week. And she had, her Bible study. She had these regular routine things that were all taken away because they were all seniors and it was in the middle of the lockdowns. And I think that really did accelerate. I mean, we knew that the trajectory of her illness is about 4 to 7 years. She passed away at the 4-year mark. And I think that was a big part of it, is I think it really accelerated her progression because she didn't have that opportunity.
So yeah, I thought about it that way, but yeah, she was a very social person, and yeah, I could see where that. I mean, it was hard for all of us, right? The disruption in the isolation, and then you add the cognitive on top of that, and yeah, it just is it's a lot. When did you realize that hospice was necessary, and what was that experience like for you, like looking back on that?
Yeah. So mom was admitted to the assisted living facility and declined really rapidly from there. Her mobility issues became significantly more severe. She was working with a physical therapist who actually was the daughter of a friend, again, small towns. That was really helpful because Lindsay and I would text a lot and talk about, the best ways to support mom and different things we could try. But she was just declining physically, and then she stopped eating, which is actually something that's known for PSP. Ultimately, that's the progression, is you lose the ability to swallow. And ultimately, that is what she passed from, was an inability to have nourishment. And she had a living will that she did not want a feeding tube, and that's actually not medically recommended for someone in her condition. So the not eating led to an ER visit, which led to a referral to a geriatric psychiatry unit, which again, in a rural community, that's the best resource, but it's still not ideal. But we were connected there with a really young doctor who was kind of on the cutting edge of some of these more rare illnesses and actually had a passion for it and an interest in it. He was the first doctor we encountered that was familiar with what mom had, without me having to do the background education myself. So he really helped us adjust some of her medications. She was pretty over medicated. And we got to see a little bit of that spark come back cognitively, not a lot, but a little bit. Like, she would crack a joke here and there. And but it was that doctor and I who kind of came to realization that she needs hospice care because we want to keep her comfortable and increase the quality of her remaining days, as opposed to increasing the quantity in a way that wasn't working for her. And so they made the decision to move. And we had hoped that we would get to go back to the assisted living because it had this very home-like environment and culture. And she knew some of the staff there, and they really recommended that she go into the skilled nursing facility because they felt like she was going to eventually need that level of care. And they were correct in that assessment. She ended up needing it within that following month and then passing the month after that. So, but I think having the hospice team and the skilled nursing team really made such a difference. Like, I cannot say enough about how much the hospice team and the nurses at the skilled nursing facility who took care of my mom and frankly of me in her final weeks was really, they're the unsung heroes, and they deserve all of the credit in the world because they really have an empathy, and they do this every day, but they treat everyone like they're the only one. Like, they really treated my mom like she was their mom. And that was just so incredible and brought so much comfort to my mom and to me in a really, really dark period of our lives.
Yeah. I think about you had to take so much time off from work at the end, like your dad, first of all, like, you know, being there the last 2 weeks with you of your, you know, the last week of your mom's life, and then, you know, the Memorial Week, I would say, getting that all together, like, and just kind of looking at it, grief and death is so exhausting. You know, I think about like everything we went through together, like your dad had ignored, there was a leak in the roof, your brakes went out, the dog had an ear infection. You know, you had to pick the plot, you had to do the funeral arrangements. There was just so many things, and you were just this master list maker, and we, you know, hammered through it and got it done. But, you know, how did you, first of all, how did you get the time off of work? Like, what were that conversations like? And then did you ever feel like you had the time to grieve through all that?
Yeah, so the work thing, I am very thankful to my employer, the American College of Radiology. I think it helps that we are healthcare, but they really, like, from the moment I got the call from the hospice nurse, like, we think it's time for you to come home. And to be clear, when she called, she was estimating a couple days to a week. My mom ended up living 4 weeks, and she lived 20 days without food or water, which is pretty unheard of.
Unheard of,
It was
yes.
definitely the first time that the rural hospice team had seen that. And frankly, that part was horrific and emotionally just, I wish I had had more time with my mom, but not like that. Yeah, it's brutal. And I think it's okay. And to your second question, yes, like, I think I was so focused on the doing, particularly while she was alive, but even the immediate aftermath of wanting to have the kind of celebration of life that she helped plan for your dad and wanting to honor who she was in that way. I think my grief was like delayed onset, where it's hitting me more now than it did then, because, and like a lot of people would comment throughout the journey and even the week of the funeral, like, I don't know how you did that. You're so brave. You're so strong. And I knew that was coming from a place of love, but it was like, I don't feel that. Like, I don't feel brave or strong. I feel like, and I reached out to a college friend who had lost his mom to cancer, also really young. And I said, how did you do this? Like, how do you do it all? How do you manage it all? And he said, I didn't feel like I had a choice. And that was how it felt for me as well. Like, you dig deep and you do, but eventually you have to process it. And that's where opportunities like this, our sisters weekend, frankly, working with a good therapist of my own, that's where those support pieces come in to make sure you're taking care of you.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing all of that. I think that caregivers are some of the most resilient people that I know. It's just like, we just,
absolutely,
you know, gold stars for just showing up. But I'm also grateful that we, you know, I know we had a couple, you know, joyful, fun, I don't know if you can call them that, moments where we got our nails done. And I remember you helped me pick out a color. As I said, I want my nails to be Aunt Chris nails, because she always had like bright and vibrant, and I'm like a bubble bath neutral kind of girl. And then we had some wings at the hitching post, like we weren't cooking meals. And then I think about like again, maybe it's the rural small town connection, but the creativity that people had about reaching out and offering you support. It's like they knew you, and they knew that, you know, you were a family that liked to go out to eat at night. So gift cards make sense, or maybe breakfast in the morning, or one person came and cleaned your house, cleaned your parents' house. And like, we didn't want all this food because you don't live there, and your dad was going to a respite for 30 days, which you were also coordinating because you were afraid to leave him alone by himself. And he could take the dog with him, which was amazing. But I just thought there was some creativity there, where people brought breakfast and they donated, they had paper products. Like, it was just very thoughtful.
Yeah. And it was the people who, to your point, just did it. Like that family friend, again, small town, people know where the keys are hidden. She knew where our key was, and she just let herself in. And we had come home from the funeral planning meeting to find her cleaning. And like, that just meant the world to me. And we just held each other and cried next to the mop. And like, that's what you do.
Yeah.
And yeah, the people who would just show up in a million little ways. The food obviously was appreciated, but to your point, one person really who lives there long term, and we would run out of space. Like I remember we ran out of space in the fridge. And so I would have to tell people like what we actually need. And the house cleaning thing, the self-care for me and my dad. And frankly, now that we're 2 months out of it, the people who are showing up now are just as appreciated as the people who showed up then, because a lot of life just goes back to normal. And so the people who have appreciated the fact that my dad's alone now and still dealing with his grief. And so they've reached out to him to take him to a Pirates baseball game, or just bring a meal, or just even drop in just to say hello, has really made a huge difference. And something special that Lindsay, the PT who was working with my mom, who's a family friend, and her mom did, that I really love. I have my own jar. It's on the other side of the apartment, or I'd go get it, but it's a moments to remember jar. And what she had done is she passed out these little note cards to people who had known my mom from all different walks of life, and had them write down a favorite memory. And you put the memory in the jar, and she gave me a spare deck of 20 cards for myself. And she said, anytime a happy memory of your mom comes through your mind, just jot it down on a card and stick it in the jar. And then on your toughest days, you'll be able to reflect back, and like, you'll never forget her, and you'll never forget those moments. And some of the moments I knew right away reading through them, and some of them were things I had known but forgotten about and hadn't thought of in years. And some are wonderful things I never knew before that I know now. And that makes so much sense. So it's like, yep, that was mom. And so that was a really special idea that I want to share with listeners, because if you've got someone grieving in your life, and inevitably you will, that really meant a lot.
I love that. That's amazing. And I think those will keep coming. I know it's been, a year since my mom has passed, and 7 years since dad had passed. And you still think of things, and it's just like random stuff. Like I'd be watching, my husband and I are rewatching Jason, Sopranos. I've never watched it. He watched it because there's a movie coming out, like a prequel. And Tony Soprano's like eating like red pickled peppers. And I was like, and I looked at Jason, I was like, my dad ate those all the time. And he's like, yeah, I was just thinking that. Like, there's just random little shit like that comes up that, and I think it's good to just kind of air it and talk about it. These people are a huge part of your life. Okay, let's switch gears, Megan. We want to talk about self-care. So, one of the things that you had, I had picked your brain on before, is that you were recommending as a self-care tip, which I thought was interesting, is you said, have the hard conversations with your loved ones now while you're all healthy. It make the hardest days just a little easier. And I want to refer people to the previous episode. We just had Paul Malley, who's the president of 5 Wishes, on the podcast to help with those end of life conversations. But why did you think of that, I guess, when you were thinking about a self-care tip?
Yeah, because for me, I felt like it really did fall on my shoulders to make some of those decisions. And so for my mental load, I was able to take comfort in the fact that, particularly because my mom did not go willingly to the assisted living at first. And I think having gone through the process with her mother and with your dad, and seeing how she handled that. And I distinctly remember being a teenager with grandma, early 20s with your dad, my mom saying, like, if I ever get to this point, you cannot do this by yourself, and you need to, call on your cousins and call on your dad. And if it comes time that I need skilled care, then you do it. Like, you're not going to give up your life. Now, that narrative changed as her cognitive function changed, but being able to refer back to those many conversations made me have less self-doubt. I think as a caregiver, at least for me, as an Enneagram 2, you're always going to have that element of self-doubt, but having that basis with my mom, I would refer back to it a lot.
Yeah.
And the example, like I remember one time grandma spit food out at her when my mom was trying to feed her when she was in care. And like remembering those moments and how it used to frustrate my mom made me feel less guilty when the tables had turned. And I think that's something that I'm thankful that we had. And even having that, I didn't have all the details. Like we hadn't done the 5 Wishes. And I wish that we had, because I think it just gives you more peace, and it's easier to talk about when you're healthy. And I do believe, particularly with cognitive illnesses, that your healthy wishes are your wishes. And my mom, even in the beginning stages of her illness, would say that. Like, she'd say, like, I don't feel like I'm myself. I don't trust myself. Yeah. And so that was the advice I found myself giving my friends a lot, because they would come to me, particularly other only children or people in their late 20s, early 30s, and say, like, oh my gosh, this must be so hard, and like, blah, blah, blah. And I would just say to them, like, my best advice to you is to, like, get this out of the way now. And you never want to have the conversation, but it helps. It's a way to love your loved ones. Like, I think it was a way that my mom loved me and helped prepare me for something that's inevitable. And like, for myself, like, I'm still single and not married, but when I have a partner and I have children, like, I want them to have that peace too, and to know what my wishes are, so that they don't have to second guess themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember there was a moment at the memorial service where you were just like, I'm so exhausted from all these micro decisions and, all the decision making, and it having some of that, I think, lessens that, because then you're just following orders and there's peace of mind, and it allows you to just be in the moment some of those final days without having to just stress about some of the decision making. I think one of the other things that when you were talking, that made me, I know you were power of attorney, but one of the things that I think I had forgotten about and relearned with you is that when you're power of attorney and your loved one dies, like, you have to then kind of scramble to find the money to do some of these things at the end. Maybe just share about that for a second.
Yes. Yeah. Those are two really big things. I would say establish medical power of attorney and financial power of attorney with your loved one, whether that's your spouse, your child. Get those things out of the way, because particularly with a cognitive illness, like, we had just gotten my mom's in the nick of time, because if they're medically not competent to make their own decisions and you don't have one in place, then a lot of times you have to go through the court and have guardianship hearings, and like, the thought of that, I could not have dealt with it, with everything else that we were dealing with at the time. And it did help us make some decisions that needed to be made much more efficiently, much more quickly. So definitely advocate for that. Also, yeah, after death, like, something I didn't realize is that your power of attorney expires at the time of death. And then it goes to whoever's specified in the will. So like, in our case, my dad and I were just kind of always assuming my mom had money left in her retirement account, so we would just use some of that to pay for the funeral expenses. But because my power of attorney had lapsed at the time of her death, those assets were frozen until they're legally processed by the state. And so we ended up having to do something where, like, we took it out of my dad's retirement account and then paid him back from mom's account just last week, actually. And that's something where, like, if I had been thinking ahead when we admitted her to hospice, I could have withdrawn $10,000 to $15,000 to cover funeral expenses and put it into savings. So those little things that, like, no, you don't know to ask, and nobody tells you.
No.
But that's where resources like this podcast, I think, are really helpful, and blogs, and working with the associations for whatever illness your loved one's struggling with. I know Cure PSP and the Association for Frontotemporal Dementia were really helpful to me, and just knowing, like, what questions to ask, health, legal, financial, and then also support for caregivers.
Yeah, so good. Speaking of support and self-care, like, what did your self-care look like during these years for your mom, and what does it look like now?
Yeah, I think it was definitely a learning process to, like, not feel selfish when I needed a break or needed a boundary. And I think even just being transparent with that, with the loved one, and also with your support group. I know in the past you've talked with no barrier teams. And so for me, like, it was definitely towards the end, reaching out to my therapist and setting regular weekly appointments again, and making sure that I had that time for myself to process and grieve and really sit with my emotions, because I think sometimes I'd get so caught up in the doing that I would just stuff it all down. And it would manifest in other ways. Like, it would manifest physically a lot, where I would notice, like, tension in my body, or weight gain or different things. And so I tried to start implementing a monthly massage at a local massage spa, to try to relieve some of that physical tension that I was feeling. And just taking breaks, giving myself permission to take breaks. It was just like 2 minutes to walk around the healthcare facility. I know I kind of sat vigil at mom's bed, and finally you and your sisters were actually the ones who were like, this is not sustainable. You can't live there during the day and sleep in a reclining chair for a month. It's not gonna work. So being able to accept help is huge, I think. And then giving yourself forgiveness. I mean, my mom and I had conversations towards the end. She had a lucid moment where she told me, like, I was apologizing for all the ways I didn't handle it well in the beginning when we didn't realize what her illness was. And I thought she was just being spiteful or stubborn. And, you know, she had forgiven me for that. But I think forgiving myself too, that like, you don't know at the beginning and sometimes even the middle and end of your caregiver journey, it's a process and you're learning too. And you didn't choose it, and neither did they. And I think that that's the hard part sometimes. But just being able to acknowledge that like, you're not going to do it perfect, but you do the best you can with the information you have. And if you get new information, maybe you make a new decision, and that's okay. Nobody has all the answers. And also not letting anybody shame you. Like the support groups were great, but also sometimes I would see like people, like anything with social media, like people have very strong opinions one way or another. And it goes back to no one knows your loved one like you do. So what might be the right decision for someone else maybe isn't the right decision for you and your loved one, and that's okay.
Yeah, I know one of the areas that feels very shameful sometimes is just like living with your person and caring for them at home, and having the assisted living or a senior living facility. And to your point, like every situation is different, and you also every person is different and what they have going on. And I don't think there's one right answer. And I hate that's like a divisive thing potentially. It's almost like the stay-at-home mom versus the working mom. I like compare it to that. And it's like, come on, can't we just, we're all trying to just figure it out here. So let's give ourselves some grace. And I appreciate everything you said about forgiveness. It's such a healthy thing. You're so wise, Meg. You're just,
it's a lot of really good therapy and good caregiver support groups, I tell you.
That's awesome. Well, let's have a little fun. We're gonna go through the lightning round, and these are all prompts from my book, the Just For You Daily Self-Care Journal. I wrote it with caregivers in mind, but it's really for anyone. And the point is to try to infuse, and remember who you are before your caregiving season, and reflect on the good times. So I thought this question would be appropriate for you. This is what the inside looks like, by the way. Yeah. So Disney. You're my total Disney. How many times have you been to Disney World?
Oh my gosh. Probably 6 or 7. I'm going at the end of this month. And a friend of mine growing up is very good friends with Aladdin. Hint, hint, wink, wink. So yeah, I'm a total Disney junkie. Love that.
I love it. Well, so if you were a Disney character, Megan, who would you be?
Oh my goodness, that is an excellent question. I think I always gravitated towards Belle, because
that's my person.
Is it?
Yeah.
She always had her nose in a book. And that is really my passion. Like another way that I try to do self-care is to block off some time before bed to unwind and read. And on vacations too, like my favorite thing is like a slow morning on a deck near a body of water, reading a book. Like that is just
happy place.
Yeah.
I love that. And I thought, I know we're friends on Goodreads, and we have a lot of similarities. Like you're my sister from a different mother in a lot of ways. But and so on the book topic, I know I had earmarked another one. Do you have a favorite fiction or nonfiction book?
My gosh, that's like making someone pick their favorite child.
I know. It doesn't have to be the favorite, maybe just something that comes to mind, a favorite.
Yeah. A couple. Obviously, the Bible really is a book that I went back to a lot in my caregiver journey. I would sit and read Psalms to my mom. My faith is a big part of my life. So I think that's a big one. On the caregiver side, there's a book called, I believe it's Of Laughter and Mayhem. And it's all about caring for a loved one with a cognitive disease or dementia. And it was short, bite-sized chapters, which at that time in my caregiver journey is really what I needed. I didn't have time to read for hours, but I could read 10 minutes before bed. And to your point, like finding the levity and the humor in some of these situations is really important. And we were able to do that along the way, not often enough, but we could. And it also just gave me some like practical tips for how to help myself and my dad, because that was really around the time when we were making the transition to assisted living, and just engaging with her reality and like how to do that better. There were a lot of good tips in that book. Fiction wise, it's probably The Nightingale by Hannah. That's one of my favorites that stands out.
I love that one too. So we'll link to all those books. I haven't read the dementia one that you mentioned, so I'll have to seek that one out and put it in my next book haul blog review. I just did one of those. What is your, and I know, what is your favorite holiday tradition to do with your family? It doesn't have to be, it can be any holiday.
Interesting. That's a good question too. We were big Christmas people always. My mom and I used to love watching the Hallmark movies, and my dad would always provide the color commentary of like how it's always the same plot and the same. We'd be like, we know, be quiet. But that's definitely in Christmas morning. And so I'm filled with like a nostalgia and frankly a little bit of a dread for this year of first that I have ahead. And I already crossed one barrier. Another little known holiday tradition is our family always went to Rehoboth Beach for Labor Day. And I found myself getting really emotional in my grief process, but even about just like little things like being at the grocery store and running into something. And I realized it was because that tradition was coming up and we didn't have it this year, because my dad and I are working on building new traditions, but we decided that to do the traditional beach week without her would just be too hard for both of us. You would notice the empty chair more. But yeah, just navigating that. But that was always so much fun. My mom and I love to go. There's a place in Rehoboth Beach. There's a cute little bookstore, Browse About Books, that I would love to be my encore career someday if y'all are listening. And we would get ice cream, and we just had little micro traditions. We always stayed at the same little Airbnb that has parrots in the lobby, and like just, yeah, lots of happy memories. My mom and I were beach people and loved being near the water. So
I love the mindset you have though, Megan, about like you and your dad thinking about what your new traditions are. Because I also know your mom had opinions about what she didn't want to do. And so maybe you and your dad can explore different things. And of course, you've always got an open invite to come to an experience. It's been a while since you've experienced an Atlanta holidays, but that's always an option for you and your dad to escape the cool and come see us in warmer weather.
Yes, that would be great.
All right, last question, and I know this is I'm going to shake it up as I pick the one on the other side, because I know you and I think are similar in that we're both emotional eaters. So that's a true confession. We do like to stuff things down and layer some good yummy food on top. But I want to find out, like, what did you eat that was healthy recently, today or yesterday, since it's still early today?
What did I eat that was healthy?
Yeah.
I have gotten into the smoothie game a little bit. So like trying to get extra greens and into my diet has been helpful. Some protein, that's something that I think is true of a lot of women in particular, is we're pretty protein deficient. So a little protein powder, some spinach, occasionally some fruit if it's afternoon. I try not to eat too much fruit in the morning, just because it's not good to spike your blood sugar that way. And then water. I always have a glass of water nearby, which is good for the brain. It's good for hydration. And so I think because in particular mom suffered from a brain illness, definitely interested in making sure that I stay hydrated.
Mm-hmm. Well, I see it's interesting you brought up smoothies because I just shared a recipe on Instagram today. I've been experienced with Instagram Reels. I'm new at it, so give me some grace there. But I put one of my smoothie recipes on, and one tip I got about spinach is to blend the spinach separately before you start adding everything else in, and it breaks it up a little bit better, so it's not as. So I'm passing that on because that was a tip for me. But I'm a smoothie girl too. It's easy, and water as well is a big thing there. So I'm excited. I'm going to get to see you in just a few weeks for Sisters Weekend, which is one of our favorite times of year. We're going to be on the beach. We're definitely going to be reading. We'll probably have some cocktails, and we can, reminisce about your mama too, and just catch up. So.
Can't wait. It's going to be great. It's my first real vacation this year. So I'm excited for that. Really looking forward to it.
We're not going to disappoint you. And it's also a cousin's big milestone birthday. So I'm sure we're going to have quite a bit of, and probably some massaging in there as well. I think it'll be key. So Meg, I love you. I'm a fan, and I'm just very appreciative that you came on. And I know your mama would be proud with how you handle everything, and I just appreciate you're transparent with your emotions, and that it's still work in progress.
And likewise, I'm so proud of you and thankful for this resource for caregivers. I think a lot of times, especially if you're new to it, it can feel really isolating. So I'm thankful for the communities and the support that I've experienced through Happy Healthy Caregiver and some of the other associations to have that, build that rope team and be able to not feel so alone in it.
That's so perfect. Thank you so much. We'll chat soon. Love you. Love ya.
Love you. Love ya. Bye-bye.